Stone Soup. A kindly old stranger was walking through the land when he came upon a village. As he entered, the villagers moved towards their homes, locking doors and windows. The stranger smiled and asked, "Why are you all so frightened? I am a simple traveler, looking for a soft place to stay for the night, and a warm place for a meal." "There's not a bite to eat," he was told. "We are weak and our children are hungry." "Oh, I have everything I need," he said. "In fact, I was thinking of making some stone soup to share with all of you." He pulled an iron cauldron from his cloak, filled it with water, and began to build a fire under it. Then, with great ceremony, he drew an ordinary-looking stone from a silken bag and dropped it into the water. By now, hearing the rumor of food, most of the villagers had come out of their homes or watched from their windows. As the stranger sniffed the broth and licked his lips in anticipation, hunger began to overcome their fear. "Ah," said the stranger, "I do like a tasty stone soup. Of course, stone soup with cabbage. That's much better." Soon, a villager approached hesitantly, holding a small cabbage. He added it to the pot. "Wonderful!" cried the stranger. "You know, I once had stone soup with cabbage and a bit of salt beef as well, and it was fit for a king." The village butcher managed to find some salt beef, and so it went through potatoes, onions, carrots, mushrooms, and so on, until there was indeed a delicious meal for everyone in the village to share. The villager elder offered the stranger a great deal of money for the magical stone, but he refused to sell it and traveled on the next day. As he left, the stranger came upon a group of village children standing near the road. He gave the silken bag to the youngest child and whispered to him that it was not the stone, but the villagers that had performed the magic. By working together, with everyone contributing what they can, a greater good is achieved. The Water Fairy. A little brother and a little sister were playing by a well, and while they were playing there, they both fell in. A water fairy was down there. She said, "Now I have you. Now you will have to work for me." She gave the little girl tangled, dirty flax to spin, and she had to fill a bottomless barrel with water. The boy had to chop down a tree with a dull axe, and all they got to eat were dumplings as hard as rocks. Finally, the children became so impatient that they waited until one Sunday when the fairy was away, and then they ran away. When the fairy came back, she saw that the children had ran away, and she started to follow them. The children saw her from afar, and the girl threw a brush behind her, which turned into a large brush mountain with thousands and thousands of spikes, which the fairy had to climb over with great difficulty, but she finally got to the other side. Then the girl threw a mirror behind her, which turned into a glass mountain, which was so slippery that it was impossible for the fairy to climb over it. Then she thought, "I will quickly go home and get my axe and chop the glass mountain in two." However, by the time she returned and had chopped up the glass mountain, the children were very far away. So the water fairy had to trudge back to her well. Sweet Porridge. There was a poor but good little girl who lived alone with her mother, and they no longer had anything to eat. So the child went into the forest, and there an aged woman met her who was aware of her sorrow, and presented her with a little pot, which, when she said, "Cook, little pot, cook," would cook good, sweet porridge, and when she said, "Stop, little pot," stopped cooking. The girl took the pots home to her mother, and now they were freed from their hunger and ate sweet porridge as often as they wanted. Once on a time when the girl had gone out, her mother said, "Cook, little pot, cook," and it did cook, and she ate till she was satisfied, and then she wanted the pot to stop cooking, but did not know the words. So the pot went on cooking, and the porridge rose over the edge, and still it cooked and cooked and cooked, until the kitchen and the whole house were full, and then the next house and the whole street, just as if it wanted to satisfy the hunger of the whole world. At last, when only one single house remained, the child came home and just said, "Stop, little pot," and the pot stopped, and whoever wished to return to the town had to eat his way back. The Nail. A merchant had done good business at the fair and had earned a lot of money. Then he wanted to travel home and wanted to be in his own house before the night fell. So he packed his trunk with the money on his horse and rode away. At noon he rested in a town, and when he wanted to go further, the stable boy brought out his horse and said, "A nail is wanting, sir, in the shoe of its left foot." "Let it be," answered the merchant. "The shoe will certainly stay on for 6 miles I have still to go. I am in a hurry." In the afternoon, when he once more alighted and had his horse fed, the stable boy went into the room to him and said, "Sir, a shoe is missing from your horse's left hind foot. Shall I take him to the blacksmith?" "Let it be," answered the man. "The horse can very well hold out for the couple of miles which remain. I am in a hurry." He rode on, but before long the horse began to limp. It had not limped long before it began to stumble, and couldn't go on. The merchant was forced to leave the horse where it was, and unbuckle the trunk, take it on its back, and go home on foot. And there he did not arrive until quite late at night. "And that unlucky nail," he said to himself, "has caused all of this disaster. Make haste slowly." The Fairy. Once upon a time, there was a widow who had 2 daughters. The elder was so much like her, both in looks and character, that whoever saw the daughter saw the mother. They were both so disagreeable and so proud that it was impossible to live with them. The younger, who was the very picture of her father, was one of the most beautiful girls ever seen. As people naturally love their own likeness, this mother doted on her elder daughter, and at the same time had a great aversion for the younger. She made her eat in the kitchen and work continually. Among other things, this unfortunate child had to go twice a day to draw water more than 1.5 miles from the house, and bring home a pitcher full of it. One day, as she was at this fountain, there came to her a poor woman who begged of her to let her drink. "Oh yes, of course," said this pretty little girl. So she took some of the best, clearest water from the fountain and gave it to her. The good woman, having drunk, said to her, "You are so pretty and so good that I cannot help giving you a gift." For this was a fairy who had taken the form of a poor country woman to see how far the good manners of this pretty girl would go. "I will give you a gift," continued the fairy, "that at every word you speak there shall come out of your mouth either a flower or a jewel." When this pretty girl returned, her mother scolded at her for staying so long at the fountain. "I beg your pardon, mother," said the poor girl. and in speaking these words, there came out of her mouth 2 roses, 2 pearls, and 2 large diamonds. "What is it I see there?" said her mother, quite astonished. "I think pearls and diamonds come out of the girl's mouth. How happens this, my child?" So the girl told her the story of the old woman. "Truly," cried the mother, "I must send my own dear child there." So the other girl went, but grumbled all the way, taking with her the best silver tankard in the house. She no sooner reached the fountain that she saw coming out of the wood a magnificently dressed lady, who came up to her and asked to drink. This was the same fairy who had appeared to her sister, but she had now taken the air and dress of a princess, to see how far this girl's rudeness would go. "Did I come here to serve you with water, pray? I suppose this silver tankard was brought purely for your fancy, was it? However, you may drink out of it if you want," said the proud, ill-bred girl. "You are not polite," answered the fairy without anger. "Well then, since you are so disobliging, I will give you a gift. At every word you speak, there shall come out of your mouth a snake or a toad." So soon as her mother saw her coming, she cried out, "Well, daughter?" "Well, mother," answered the unhappy girl, throwing out of her mouth a snake and a toad. "Oh, mercy!" cried the mother. "What is it I see? It is her sister who has caused all this, but she shall pay for it." And immediately she ran to beat her. The poor child fled away from her and went to hide herself in the forest nearby. The king's son, who was returning home, met her, and seeing her so beautiful, asked her what she did there alone and why she cried. "Alas, sir, my mother has turned me out of the house." The king's son, who saw 5 or 6 pearls and as many diamonds come out of her mouth, desired her to tell him how that happened. She told him the whole story. The king's son fell in love with her, and, considering that such a gift was worth more than any marriage portion another bride could bring, conducted her to the palace of the king, his father, and there married her, and they lived happily ever after. The Broken Pot.
Now.
There lived in a certain place a miser. He had collected a quantity of rice by begging, and, after having dined off it, he filled the pot with what was left over. He hung the pot on a peg on the wall, placed his couch beneath, and, looking intently at it all the night, he thought, "Ah, that pot is indeed brimful of rice. Now, if there should be a famine, I should certainly make a lot of money by it. With the money, I shall buy a couple of goats. They will have young ones every 6 months, and then I will have a whole herd of goats. Then, with the goats, I shall buy cows. As soon as they have calved, I shall sell the calves. Then, with the calves, I shall buy buffaloes. With the buffaloes, mares. When the mares have foaled, I shall have plenty of horses, and when I sell them, plenty of gold. With that gold, I shall get a house with 4 wings. And then a rich man will come to my house and will give me his beautiful daughter with a large dowry. She will have a son, and I shall call him Summon. When he is old enough to be danced on his father's knee, I shall sit with a book at the back of the stable, and, while I am reading, the boy will see me, jump from his mother's lap, and run towards me. He will come too near to the horse's hoof, and, full of anger, I shall call to my wife, 'Take the baby, take him.' But she, distracted by some domestic work, does not hear me. Then I get up and give her such a kick with my foot." While he thought this, he gave a kick with his foot and broke the pot. All the rice fell over him and made him quite white. Therefore, I say, he who makes foolish plans for the future will be white all over. Sun, moon, and wind go out to dinner. One day, Sun, Moon, and Wind went out to dine with their uncle and aunt, Thunder and Lightning. Their mother, a star, waited alone in the sky for her children's return. Now, both Sun and Wind were greedy. They enjoyed the great feast that had been prepared for them. But the gentle Moon did not forget her mother. Of every dainty dish that was brought round, she placed a small portion under one of her beautiful long fingernails, that Star might also have a share in the treat. On their return, their mother, who had kept watch for them all night long, with her little bright eyes, said, "Well, children, what have you brought home for me?" Then Sun, who was the eldest, said, "I have brought nothing home for you." And Wind said, "Neither have I." But Moon said, "Mother, fetch a plate, see what I have brought you." And shaking her hands, she showered down such a choice dinner as never was seen before. Then Star turned to Sun and said, "Because you went out to amuse yourself with your friends, you shall be cursed. Henceforth your rays shall ever be hot and scorching, and shall burn all that they touch. And men shall hate you, and cover their heads when you appear. And that is why the sun is so hot to this day." Then she turned to Wind and said, "You also, you shall always blow in the hot, dry weather, and shall parch and shrivel all living things, and men shall detest and avoid you from this very time. And that is why the wind in the hot weather is still so disagreeable." But to the Moon she said, "Daughter, because you remembered your mother and kept for her a share of food, from henceforth you shall ever be cool and calm and bright. No noxious glare shall accompany your pure rays, and men shall always call you blessed. And that is why the moon's light is so soft and cool and beautiful even to this day." How the wicked sons were duped. A very wealthy old man, imagining that he was on the point of death, sent for his sons and divided his property among them. However, he did not die for several years afterwards, and miserable years they were. Besides the weariness of old age, the old fellow had to bear with much cruelty from his sons. Previously, they vied with one another in trying to please their father, hoping to receive more money. But now they had received their patrimony. They cared not how soon he left them, nay, the sooner the better, because he was only a needless trouble and expense, and they let the old poor man know what they felt. One day he met a friend and related to him all his troubles. The friend sympathized very much with him and promised to think over the matter. After a few days, he visited the old man and put down 4 bags full of stones and gravel before him. "Look here, friend," said he. "Your sons will get to know of my coming here today, and will inquire about it. You must pretend that I came to discharge a long-standing debt with you, and that you are several thousands of rupees richer than you thought you were. Keep these bags in your own hands, and on no account let your sons get to them as long as you are alive. You will soon find them change their conduct towards you.
Subscribe.
I will come again soon to see how you are getting on." When the young men got to hear of this further increase of wealth, they began to be more attentive and pleasing to their father than ever before, and thus they continued to the day of the old man's demise, when the bags were greedily opened and found to contain only stones and gravel. Why the fish lives in the water. Many years ago, when King Io was ruler of Calabar, the fish used to live on the land. He was a great friend of the leopard, and frequently used to go to his house in the bush, where they had a lot of fun together. Now the leopard had a very beautiful wife, with whom the fish fell in love. And after a time, whenever the leopard was absent in the bush, the fish used to go to his house, and the wife and the fish used to be together, until at last an old woman who lived near informed the leopard what happened whenever he went away. At first the leopard would not believe that the fish, who had been his friend for so long, would play such a low trick, but one night he came back unexpectedly and found the fish and his wife together. The leopard was very angry and wanted to kill the fish, but he thought that because they had been friends for so long, he would not deal with him himself, but would report his behavior to King Io. This he did, and the king held a big meeting at which the leopard stated his case quite shortly, but when the fish was put upon his defense he had nothing to say. So the king, addressing his subjects, said, "This is a very bad case, as the fish had been the leopard's friend and had been trusted by him, but the fish has taken advantage of his friend's absence and has betrayed him." The king therefore made an order that for the future the fish should live in the water, and that if he ever came on the land, he should die. Why the flies bother the cows. When Adia was queen of Calabar, being very rich and hospitable, she used to give big feasts to all the animals, but she never invited the wild beasts, as she was afraid of them. At one feast she gave, there were 3 large tables, and she told the cow to sit at the head of the table, as she was the biggest animal present, and share out the food. The cow was quite ready to do this, and the first course was passed, which the cow shared out amongst the people, but forgot the fly because he was so small. When the fly saw this, he called out to the cow to give him his share, but the cow said, "Be quiet, my friend, you must have patience." When the second course arrived, the fly once again called out to the cow, but the cow merely pointed to her eye and told the fly to look there, and he would get food later. At last, all the dishes were finished, and the fly, who had received no food by the cow, went supperless to bed. The next day, the fly complained to the queen, who decided that, as the cow had presided at the feast and had not given the fly his share, for the future the fly could annoy the cow as much as he wanted to get food. For this reason, at the present time, whenever the cows are, the flies can always be seen asking the cows for food, in accordance with the queen's orders. The Cock and the Pearl. A cock was once strutting up and down the farmyard among the hens, when suddenly he saw something shining among the straw. "Ho, ho, that's for me, I want it." And soon he rooted it out from beneath the straw. What did it turn out to be but a pearl that someone by chance had lost in the yard? You may be a treasure to men that prize you, but for me I would rather have preferred a single barley corn than a peck of pearls. You are useless. Precious things are for those that can prize them. The Wolf and the Crain. A wolf had been gorging on an animal he had killed, when suddenly a small bone in the meat stuck in his throat, and he could not swallow it. He soon felt a terrible pain in his throat, and ran up and down groaning and seeking for something to relieve it. He tried to induce everyone he met to remove the bone. "I would give anything," said he, "if you would take it out." At last, the crane agreed to try, and told the wolf to lie on his side and open his jaws as wide as he could. Then the crane put its long neck down the wolf's throat, and, with its beak, loosened the bone, till at last he managed to take it out. "Now won't you give me the reward you promised?" said the crane. The wolf only grinned and said, "Be happy. You put your head inside a wolf's mouth and managed to take it out again safely. That ought to be a reward enough for you." Gratitude and greed do not go together. The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. One day, a town mouse decided to visit his cousin in the country. He was rough, this cousin, but he loved his town friend and made him heartily welcome. Beans and bacon, cheese and bread were all that he had offered, but he offered them freely. The town mouse turned up his long nose at this country fare and said, "I cannot understand, cousin. How can you put up with such poor food as this? But of course, you cannot expect anything better in the country. Come with me, and I will show you how to live. When you have been in town a week, you will wonder how you could ever have stood a country life." No sooner said than done. The two mice set off for the town and arrived at the town mouse's residence late at night. "You will want some food and drink after a long journey," said the polite town mouse, and took his friend into the grand dining room. There they found the remains of a fine feast, and soon the two mice were eating up jellies and cakes and sweets and everything that was nice. Suddenly they heard growling and barking. "What is that?" said the country mouse. "It is only the dogs of the house," answered the other. "Only," said the country mouse. "I do not like dogs." Just at that moment the door flew open. In came two huge dogs, and the two mice had to scamper down and run off. "Goodbye, cousin," said the country mouse. "Beans and bacon in peace are better than cakes and ale in fear." The Fox and the Mask. A fox had somehow managed to get into the storeroom of a theatre. Suddenly, he observed a face glaring down on him, and was very frightened. But looking more closely, he saw that it was only a mask, such as actors use to put over their face. "Ah," said the fox, "you truly look very fine. But it is a pity that you do not have any brains. A fair face is useless without brains." The Lion and the Statue. One day, a man and a lion were discussing the relative strength of men and lions. The man said that he and all his fellow men were stronger than lions, because they were much more intelligent. "Come with me," he said, "and I will soon prove that I am right." So he took him into the park and showed him a statue of Hercules overcoming the lion and tearing him in two. "Oh, that is all very well," said the lion, "but honestly it proves nothing, for it was a man who made the statue." We can easily represent things as we wish them to be.
Subscribe
The Fisherman
now.
and the Little Fish. One day, a fisherman caught a little fish. It was the only fish he had caught all day. "Pray let me go," said the little fish. "I am much too small for you right now. I can't feed you. If you put me back into the river, I shall soon grow, and then you can make a fine meal off me." "Nay, nay, my little fish," said the fisherman. "I have you now. I might not catch you in the future. A little thing in hand is worth more than a great thing in prospect." The Ant and the Dove. An ant went to the bank of a river to quench his thirst, and, being carried away by the rush of the stream, was on the point of drowning. A dove, sitting on the tree overhanging the water, plucked a leaf and let it fall into the stream. The ant climbed onto it and floated safely to the bank. Shortly afterwards, a bird-catcher came and stood under the tree, wanting to catch the dove. The ant, perceiving his design, stung him in the foot. In pain, the bird-catcher ran away, and the noise made the dove take wing. One good turn deserves another. The Boy and the Nettle. A boy, while wandering through a field, was stung by a nettle. He ran home quickly and told his mother, saying, "Although it hurts me very much, I only touched the nettle gently." The mother wisely said, "That was just why it stung you. The next time you touch a nettle, you must grasp it boldly. That way it will be as soft as silk to your hand, and not in the least hurt you. Whatever you do, do with all your might." The Crow and the Pitcher. The Crow and the Pitcher. A crow, half dead with thirst, came upon a pitcher which had once been full of water. But when the crow put its beak into the pitcher, he found that only very little water was left in it, and he simply couldn't reach far enough down to get it. He tried and he tried. He tried everything to push his head into the pitcher, but at last he gave up in despair. Suddenly, his head into the pitcher, but at last he gave up in despair. Suddenly, a thought came to him. He took a pebble and dropped it into the pitcher. Then he took another pebble and dropped it into the pitcher. Then he took yet another pebble and dropped that into the pitcher. And so on. At last, he saw the water mount up near him, and after casting in a few more pebbles, he was able to drink and quench his thirst. Little by little does the trick. The Goose that laid the golden egg. A man and his wife had the good fortune to possess a goose which laid a golden egg every day. Lucky though they were, they soon began to think that they were not getting rich fast enough, and, imagining the bird must be made of gold inside, they decided to kill it in order to secure the whole store of precious metal at once. But when they cut it open, they found it was just like any other goose. Thus they neither got rich all at once, as they had hoped, nor enjoyed any longer the daily addition to their wealth. Those who want too much lose all. The Frogs and the Ox. An ox came down to a reedy pool to drink. As he splashed heavily into the water, he crushed a young frog into the mud. The old frog soon missed the little one and asked his brothers and sisters what had become of him. "A great big monster," said one of them, "stepped on little brother with one of his huge feet." "Big, was he?" said the old frog, puffing herself up. "Was he as big as this?" "Oh, much bigger," they cried. The frog puffed up still more. "He could not have been bigger than this," she said. But the little frogs all declared that the monster was much, much bigger, and the old frog kept puffing herself out more and more until, all at once, she exploded. Do not attempt the impossible. The Bundle of Sticks. A certain father had a family of sons who were forever quarreling among themselves. No words he could say did the least good, so he cast about in his mind for some very striking example that should make them see that discord would lead them to misfortune. One day, when the quarreling had been much more violent than usual, and each of the sons was moping in a surly manner, he asked one of them to bring him a bundle of sticks. Then, handing the bundle to each of his sons, in turn, he told them to try to break it. But, although each one tried his best, none was able to do so. The father then untied the bundle and gave the sticks to his sons to break one by one. This they did very easily. "My sons," said the father, "do you not see how certain it is that if you agree with each other and help each other, it will be impossible for your enemies to injure you. But if you are divided among yourselves, you will be no stronger than a single stick in that bundle. In unity is strength." The donkey and his driver. A donkey was being driven along a road leading down the mountainside, when he suddenly took it into his silly head to choose his own path. He could see his stall at the foot of the mountain, and to him the quickest way down seemed to be over the edge of the nearest cliff. Just as he was about to leap over, his master caught him by the tail and tried to pull him back. But the stubborn donkey would not yield and pulled with all his might. "Very well," said his master, "go your way, you willful beast, and see where it leads you." With that, he let go, and the foolish donkey tumbled head over heels down the mountainside. They who will not listen to reason, but stubbornly go their own way against the friendly advice of those who are wiser than they, are on the road to misfortune. The Fly and the Bull. A fly flew over the meadow with much buzzing for so small a creature, and settled on the tip of one of the horns of a bull. After he had rested a short time, he made ready to fly away. But, before he left, he begged the bull's pardon for having used his horn for a resting place. "You must be very glad to have me go now," he said. "It's all the same to me," replied the bull. "I did not even know you were there." We are often of greater importance in our own eyes than in the eyes of our neighbor. The Plane Tree. Two travelers, walking in the noonday sun, sought the shade of a wide-spreading tree to rest. As they lay looking up among the pleasant leaves, they saw that it was a plane tree. "How useless is the plane," said one of them. "It bears no fruit whatever, and only serves to litter the ground with leaves." "Ungrateful creatures," said a voice from the plane tree, "you lie here in my cooling shade, and yet you say I am useless. Thus ungratefully do men receive their blessings. Our best blessings are often the least appreciated." The Sheep and the Pig. One day, a shepherd discovered a fat pig in the meadow where his sheep were pastured. He very quickly captured the porker, which squealed at the top of its voice the moment the shepherd laid his hands on it. You would have thought, to hear the loud squealing, that the pig was being cruelly hurt. But in spite of its squeals and struggles to escape, the shepherd tucked his prize under his arm and started off to the butcher's in the marketplace. The sheep in the pasture were much astonished and amused at the pig's behavior, and followed the shepherd and his charge to the pasture gate. "What makes you squeal like that?" asked one of the sheep. "The shepherd often catches and carries off one of us. but we should feel very much ashamed to make such a terrible fuss about it, like you do."
"That is all very well," replied the pig, with a squeal and a frantic kick. "When he catches you, he is only after your wool, but he wants my bacon." It is easy to be brave when there is no danger. The Travelers and the Purse.
Two men were traveling in company along the road, when one of them picked up a well-filled purse. "How lucky I am," he said. "I have found a purse. Judging by its weight, it must be full of gold."
"Do not say I have found a purse," said his companion. "Say rather, we have found a purse, and how lucky we are. Travelers ought to share alike the fortunes or misfortunes of the road." "No, no," replied the other angrily. "I found it, and I am going to keep it." Just then they heard a shout of "Stop! Thief!" and, looking around, saw a mob of people armed with clubs coming down the road. The man who had found the purse fell into a panic. "We are lost if they find the purse on us," he cried. "No, no," replied the other. "You would not say we before, so now stick to your I. Say, I am lost." We cannot expect anyone to share our misfortunes unless we are willing to share our good fortune also.
The Wolf and his Shadow. A wolf left his lair one evening in fine spirits and an excellent appetite. As he ran, the setting sun cast his shadow far out on the ground, and it looked as if the wolf were 100 times bigger than he really was. "Why," exclaimed the wolf proudly, "see how big I am! Fancy me running away from a puny lion! I'll show him who is fit to be king, he or I."
Just then, an immense shadow blotted him out entirely, and the next instant a lion struck him down with a single blow.
Do not let your fancy make you forget realities. The Oak and the Reeds.
A giant oak stood near a brook in which grew some slender reeds. When the wind blew, the great oak stood proudly upright, with its 100 arms uplifted to the sky. But the reeds bowed low in the wind and sang a sad and mournful song.
"You have reason to complain," said the oak. "The slightest breeze that ruffles the surface of the water makes you bow your heads, while I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling tempest." "Do not worry about us," replied the reeds. "The winds do not harm us. We bow before them, and so we do not break. You, in all your pride and strength, have so far resisted their blows, but the end is coming." As the reeds spoke, a great hurricane rushed out of the north. The oak stood proudly and fought against the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled in fury, and all at once the great tree fell, torn up by the roots, and lay among the pitying reeds.
Better to yield when it is folly to resist, than to resist stubbornly and be destroyed. The Boys and the Frogs. Some boys were playing one day at the edge of a pond in which lived a family of frogs. The boys amused themselves by throwing stones into the pond so as to make them skip on top of the water. The stones were flying thick and fast and the boys were enjoying themselves very much.
But the poor frogs in the pond were trembling with fear. At last, one of the frogs, the oldest and bravest, put his head out of the water and said, "Oh, please, dear children, stop your cruel play. Though it may be fun for you, it means death to us."
Always stop to think whether your fun may not be the cause of another's unhappiness.
The Donkey and the Load of Salt. A merchant, driving his donkey homeward from the seashore with a heavy load of salt, came to a river crossed by a shallow ford. They had crossed this river many times before without accident, but this time the donkey slipped and fell when halfway over. And when the merchant at last got him to his feet, much of the salt had melted away.
Delighted to find how much lighter his burden had become, the donkey finished the journey very happily. Next day, the merchant went for another load of salt. On the way home, the donkey, remembering what had happened at the ford, purposely let himself fall into the water, and again got rid of most of his burden.
The angry merchant immediately turned about and drove the donkey back to the seashore, where he loaded him with 2 great baskets of sponges. At the ford, the donkey again tumbled over, but when he had scrambled to his feet, it was a very disconsolate donkey that dragged himself homeward under a load 10 times heavier than before.
The same measures will not suit all circumstances. The Wild Boar and the Fox.
A wild boar was sharpening his tusks busily against the stump of a tree when a fox happened by. Now, the fox was always looking for a chance to make fun of his neighbors, so he made a great show of looking anxiously about, as if in fear of some hidden enemy. But the boar kept right on with his work. "Why are you doing that?" asked the fox at last with a grin. "There isn't any danger that I can see." "True enough," replied the boar. "But when danger does come, there will not be time for such work as this. My weapons will have to be ready for use then, or I shall suffer for it."
Preparedness for war is the best guarantee of peace. The Donkey, the Fox, and the Lion. A donkey and a fox had become close friends and were constantly in each other's company. While the donkey cropped a fresh bit of greens, the fox would devour a chicken from the neighboring farmyard, or a bit of cheese stolen from the dairy. One day, the pair unexpectedly met a lion. The donkey was very much frightened, but the fox calmed his fears. "I will talk to him," he said. So the fox walked boldly up to the lion. "Your Highness," he said in an undertone, so the donkey could not hear him, "I've got a fine scheme in my head. If you promise not to hurt me, I will lead that foolish creature yonder into a pit where he can't get out, and you can feast at your pleasure." The lion agreed, and the fox returned to the donkey. "I made him promise not to hurt us," said the fox, "but come, I know a good place to hide till he is gone." So the fox led the donkey into a deep pit. But when the lion saw that the donkey was his for the taking, he first of all struck down the traitor fox. Traitors may expect treachery. The Hares and the Frogs. Hares, as you know, are very timid. The least shadow sends them scurrying in fright to a hiding place. Once they decided to die rather than live in such misery, but while they were debating how best to meet their death, they thought they heard a noise and in a flash were scampering off to the warren. On the way they passed a pond, where a family of frogs was sitting among the reeds on the bank. In an instant, the startled frogs were seeking safety in the mud. "Look," cried a hare, "things are not so bad after all, for here are creatures who are afraid even of us."
However unfortunate we may think we are, there is always someone worse off than ourselves.
The Travelers and the Sea.
2 travelers were walking along the seashore. Far out, they saw something riding on the waves. "Look," said one, "a great ship rides in from distant lands, bearing rich treasures." The object they saw came even nearer the shore. "No," said the other, "that is not a treasure ship. That is some fisherman's net with the day's catch of savory fish." Still nearer came the object. The waves washed it up on the shore. "It is a chest of gold, lost from some wreck," they cried. Both travelers rushed to the beach, but they found nothing there but a water-soaked log.
Do not let your hopes carry you away from reality.
The Dog and His Master's Dinner. A dog had learned to carry his master's dinner to him. He was very faithful to his duty, though the smell of the good things in the basket tempted him. The dogs in the neighborhood noticed him carrying the basket and soon discovered what was in it. They made several attempts to steal it from him, but he always guarded it faithfully. Then, one day, all the dogs in the neighborhood got together and met him on his way with the basket. The dog tried to run away from them, but at last he stopped to argue. That was his mistake. They soon made him feel so ridiculous that he dropped the basket and seized a large piece of roast meat intended for his master's dinner. "Very well," he said, "you divide the rest. Do not stop to argue with temptation." The Vain Jackdaw and His Borrowed Feathers.
A jackdaw chanced to fly over the garden of the king's palace. There he saw with much wonder and envy a flock of royal peacocks in all the glory of their splendid plumage.
Now, the black jackdaw was not a very handsome bird, nor very refined in manner. Yet he imagined that all he needed to make himself fit for the society of the peacocks was a dress like theirs. So he picked up some cast-off feathers of the peacocks and stuck them among his own black plumes. Dressed in his borrowed finery, he strutted loftily among the birds of his own kind. Then he flew down into the garden among the peacocks, but they soon saw who he was. Angry at the cheat, they flew at him, plucking away the borrowed feathers and also some of his own. The poor jackdaw returned sadly to his former companions. There another unpleasant surprise awaited him. They had not forgotten his superior airs towards them, and, to punish him, they drove him away. Borrowed feathers do not make fine birds. The Dogs and the Hides.
Some hungry dogs saw a number of hides at the bottom of a stream, where the tanner had put them to soak. A fine hide makes an excellent meal for a hungry dog, but the water was deep, and the dogs could not reach the hides from the bank. So they held a council and decided that the very best thing to do was to drink up the river. All fell to lapping up the water as fast as they could. But though they drank and drank until, one after the other, all of them had burst with drinking, still, for all their effort, the water in the river remained as high as ever.
Do not try to do impossible things.
The Bear and the Bees.
A bear, roaming the woods in search of berries, happened on a fallen tree in which a swarm of bees had stored their honey. The bear began to nose around the log very carefully to find out if the bees were at home. Just then, one of the swarm came home from the clover field with a load of sweets. Guessing what the bear was after, the bee flew at him, stung him sharply, and then disappeared into the hollow log. The bear lost his temper in an instant and sprang upon the log, tooth and claw, to destroy the nest. But this only brought out the whole swarm. The poor bear had to take his heels, and he was able to save himself only by diving into a pool of water.
It is wiser to bear a single injury in silence than to provoke 1,000 by flying into a rage.
The Cock and the Fox.
One bright evening, as the sun was sinking on a glorious world, a wise old cock flew into a tree to roost. Before he composed himself to rest, he flapped his wings 3 times and crowed loudly. But just as he was about to put his head under his wing, his beady eyes caught a flash of red and a glimpse of a long pointed nose, and there, just below him, stood Master Fox. "Have you heard the wonderful news?" cried the fox in a very joyful and excited manner. "What news?" asked the cock, very calmly. But he had a queer, fluttery feeling inside him, for, you know, he was very much afraid of the fox. "Your family and mine and all other animals have agreed to forget their differences and live in peace and friendship from now on forever. Just think of it! I simply cannot wait to embrace you. Do come down, dear friend, and let us celebrate this joyful event." "How grand!" said the cock. "I am certainly delighted at the news." But he spoke in an absent way and, stretching up on tiptoes, seemed to be looking at something afar off. "What is it you see?" asked the fox a little anxiously. "Why, it looks to me like a couple of dogs coming this way. They must have heard the good news and—" But the fox did not wait to hear more. Off he started on a run. "Wait!" cried the cock. "Why do you run? The dogs are friends of yours now."
"Yes," answered the fox, "but they might not have heard the news. Besides, I have a very important errand that I had almost forgotten about." The cock smiled as he buried his head in his feathers and went to sleep, for he had succeeded in outwitting a very crafty enemy. The trickster is easily tricked.
The Cat, the Cock, and the Young Mouse. A very young mouse, who had never seen anything of the world, almost came to grief the very first time he ventured out, and this is the story he told his mother about his adventures. "I was strolling along very peaceably when, just as I turned the corner into the next yard, I saw 2 strange creatures. One of them had a very kind and gracious look, but the other was the most fearful monster you can imagine. You should have seen him.
On top of his head and in front of his neck hung pieces of raw red meat. He walked about restlessly, tearing up the ground with his toes and beating his arms savagely against his sides. The moment he caught sight of me, he opened his pointed mouth as if to swallow me, and then he let out a piercing roar that frightened me almost to death. Can you guess who it was that our young mouse was trying to describe to his mother? It was nobody but the barnyard cock, and the first one the little mouse had ever seen. If it had not been for that terrible monster, the mouse went on, I should have made the acquaintance of the pretty creature, who looked so good and gentle. He had thick velvety fur, a meek face, and a look that was very modest, though his eyes were bright and shining. As he looked at me, he waved his fine long tail and smiled. I am sure he was just about to speak to me when the monster I have told you about let out a screaming yell, and I ran for my life. My son, said the mother mouse, that gentle creature you saw was none other than the cat. Under his kindly appearance, he bears a grudge against every one of us. The other was nothing but a bird who wouldn't harm you in the least. As for the cat, he eats us. So be thankful, my child, that you escaped with your life, and, as long as you live, never judge people by their looks.
The Farmer and His Sons.
A rich old farmer, who felt that he had not many more days to live, called his sons to his bedside. My sons, he said, heed what I have to say to you. Do not, on any account, part with the estate that has belonged to our family for so many generations. Somewhere on it is hidden a rich treasure. I do not know the exact spot, but it is there, and you will surely find it. Spare no energy and leave no spot unturned in your search. The father died, and no sooner was he in his grave that the sons set to work digging with all their might, turning up every foot of ground with their spades, and going over the whole farm 2 or 3 times. No hidden gold did they find, but at harvest time, when they had settled their accounts and had pocketed a rich profit, far greater than that of any of their neighbors, they understood that the treasure that their father had told them about was the wealth of a bountiful crop, and that in their industry they had found the treasure. Industry is itself a treasure. The 2 pots. 2 pots, one of brass and the other of clay, stood together on the table. One day, the brass pot proposed to the earthen pot that they go out into the world together.
But the earthen pot excused himself, saying that it would be wiser for him to stay in the corner by the fire. It would take so little to break me, he said. You know how fragile I am. The least shock is sure to shatter me. Don't let that keep you at home, urged the brass pot. I shall take very good care of you. If we should happen to meet anything hard, I will step between and save you. So the earthen pot at last consented, and the 2 set out side by side, jolting along on 3 stubbly legs, first to this side, then to that, and bumping into each other at every step.
The earthen pot could not survive that sort of companionship very long. They had not gone 10 paces before the earthen pot cracked, and at the next jolt he flew into 1,000 pieces. Equals make the best friends. The goat herd and the wild goats. One cold, stormy day, a goat herd drove his goats for shelter into a cave, where a number of wild goats had also found their way. The shepherd wanted to make the wild goats part of his flock, so he fed them well.
but to his own flock he gave only just enough food to keep them alive. When the weather cleared and the shepherd led the goats out to feed, the wild goats scampered off to the hills. "Is that the thanks I get for feeding you and treating you so well?" complained the shepherd. "Do not expect us to join your flock," replied one of the wild goats. "We know how you would treat us later on if some strangers should come as we did. It is unwise to treat old friends badly for the sake of new ones."
The Milkmaid and Her Pail.
A milkmaid had been out to milk the cows and was returning from the field with the shining milk pail balanced nicely on her head.
As she walked along, her pretty head was busy with plans for the days to come. "This good rich milk," she mused, "will give me plenty of cream to churn. The butter I make I will take to the market, and with the money I get for it I will buy a lot of eggs for hatching. How nice it will be when they are all hatched and the yard is full of fine young chicks. Then, when May Day comes, I will sell them, and with the money I'll buy a lovely new dress to wear to the fair. All the young men will look at me. They will come and try to make love to me, but I shall very quickly send them about their business."
As she thought of how she would settle that matter, she tossed her head scornfully, and down fell the pail of milk to the ground, and all the milk flowed out, and with it vanished butter and eggs and chicks and new dress and all the milkmaid's pride. Do not count your chickens before they are hatched.
The Quack Toad.
An old toad once informed all his neighbors that he was a learned doctor. In fact, he could cure anything. The fox heard the news and hurried to see the toad. He looked the toad over very carefully.
"Mr. Toad," he said, "I've been told that you cure anything. But just take a look at yourself and then try some of your own medicine. If you can cure yourself of that blotchy skin and that rheumatic gait, someone might believe you. Otherwise, I should advise you to try some other profession."
Those who would mend others should first mend themselves.
The Mother and the Wolf. Early one morning, a hungry wolf was prowling around a cottage at the edge of a village, when he heard a child crying in the house. Then he heard the mother's voice say, "Hush, child, hush! Stop your crying, or I will give you to the wolf."
Surprised but delighted at the prospect of so delicious a meal, the wolf settled down under an open window, expecting every moment to have the child handed out to him. But though the little one continued to cry, the wolf waited all day in vain.
Then, toward nightfall, he heard the mother's voice again, as she sat down near the window to sing and rock her baby to sleep. "There, child, there. The wolf shall not get you. No, no. Daddy is watching, and Daddy will kill him if he should come near." Just then the father came within sight of the home, and the wolf was barely able to save himself from the dogs by a clever bit of running.
The Shepherd and the Lion.
Don't forget to subscribe.
A shepherd, counting his sheep one day, discovered that a number of them were missing. Much irritated, he very loudly and boastfully declared that he would catch the thief and punish him as he deserved. The shepherd suspected a wolf of the deed, and so set out toward a rocky region among the hills, where there were caves infested by wolves.
But before starting out, he made a vow to Jupiter that, if he would help him find the thief, he would offer a fat calf as a sacrifice. The shepherd searched a long time without finding any wolves, but Just as he was passing near a large cave on the mountain side, a huge lion stalked out, carrying a sheep. In great terror, the shepherd fell on his knees. "Alas, O Jupiter, man does not know what he asks. To find the thief, I offered to sacrifice a fat calf. Now I promise you a full-grown bull, if you but make the thief go away."
We are often not so eager for what we seek after we have found it. The Man and the Fawn. A long time ago, a man met a fawn in the forest and succeeded in making friends with him. The two soon became the best of comrades, living together in the man's hut. But one cold winter evening, as they were walking homeward, the fawn saw the man blow on his fingers. "Why do you do that?" asked the fawn. "To warm my hands," the man replied. When they reached home, the man prepared 2 bowls of porridge. These he placed steaming hot on the table, and the comrades sat down very cheerfully to enjoy the meal. But, much to the fawn's surprise, the man began to blow into his bowl of porridge. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "To cool my porridge," replied the man. The fawn sprang quickly to his feet and made for the door. "Goodbye," he said. "I've seen enough. A fellow that blows hot and cold in the same breath cannot be friends with me." The man who talks for both sides is not to be trusted by either.